Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, where I get a chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. This broadcast is sponsored by Reveal Brainspace, the industry's leading AI eDiscovery platform. Don't forget to subscribe to watch me, George Socha, weekly with leaders in eDiscovery. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. I am George Socha. I head up brand awareness at Reveal. On each episode of eDiscovery Leaders Live, I get the chance to chat with luminaries in eDiscovery and related areas. Past episodes are available on the Reveal website. Go to revealdata.com, select resources, then select eDiscovery Leaders Live. Our guest for this episode is Maureen Holland. Maureen is the Global Assurance Services Engagement Manager at AstraZeneca, and we'll get into that. Maureen, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here today for this conversation. It's great to be here.
And I'm looking forward to it. And I've got to compliment you on your background there.
Lucky in terms of I matched up the blue. I think it's a good representation about what we're going to talk about today. So
there we go. So I'd like to start out with a couple of things. One, your current role, but leading up to that, how it is that you ended up there. So what took you to where you are today? And then we'll go into what you do now.
It's a fascinating question because I have to be perfectly candid. I have been thinking about my career arc and my career path so much lately. My current role, this is my 10th month in this role. And so the easy way that we refer to it is global assurance services, pretty much. And when I look back on how I got here, I don't know that I have a single answer. I think it's a combination of I was willing to kind of do any job, meaning you name it, I've done it in the eDiscovery world. I was part of a scanning vendor and I pushed up boxes up San Francisco hills. I worked for the vendors. I was consultants. I worked for plaintiffs. I've worked for defense. And at the time, early on in my career, people would call it job hopping. So a year or two at different places and people would tell me, don't do that, don't do that. But in the end, I think all of those different experiences without really even knowing it. And I would probably say recently within the last week or two, I've been thinking about my advisory and consulting services. I think those and a combination of all those different activities has led me to my current role, which is and I'd love to ask your opinion too, like assurance services. And I would like to ask you like what you think assurance services means.
So before we even get there, I got no clue. You're going to have to enlighten me. I mean, I could try to pour meaning into those words, but I would just be guessing.
But I love that answer because what you're saying right now, I kind of did an informal research because I had to do a presentation this week. And everybody kind of has their own take on what it could be. But I think if you go and you Google it, you'll see that there's probably hundreds of different variations of it. Anyway, so this is what happens with you and I, because we can kind of go off on different tangents. But I do think having those different perspectives from all of my different career paths over the years has led to that big picture thinking, where I'm applying kind of connections and being able to piece the dots together. But what's fascinating is I do believe global assurance services, at least in the context that I'm discussing it today, is going to be the future of corporations because I'm utilizing my eDiscovery skill sets in all of these new areas. And even if I'm going to call it non-legal stakeholders for right now, because that's pretty much where we're focusing, I still need the same technologies because I will say the eDiscovery industry has been great to me. You still need the technology because it's amazing technology that can help you mitigate risk, reduce costs, protect our reputation. But I just get a chance right now to really apply and come up with solutions that are just beyond legal.
So for me to understand better, for our
Yeah.
audience to understand better, as you are looking at it and thinking about it, what in your mind does global assurance mean, global assurance services? What is that about?
So you're hitting me at a good time after all my informal research. Let me talk about traditional, what I in my mind call traditional assurance services. So right off the bat, and maybe this is the e-discovery portion of it in built into me, is that I think of auditing services, right? And you used to be able to apply it to finance, but it's pretty much doing independent. So I think of Deloitte, I think of EY, I think of KPMG, and it's more of an independent audit of an organization's records or processes, the things that they do to ensure that they're compliant, right, with either their policies or laws or regulations. So after 10 months in my current role and learning about all these new areas, like we focus on digital assets, right? So I never really understood how we had to protect our digital assets as an organization like ours. And so I think of it now as a hybrid approach, right? Where we're utilizing those traditional assurance services, but we're kind of tailoring it and bringing it in-house. Again, I'm going to use non-legal, like people who don't have to go to litigation, and crafting solutions using those skill sets, but also tacking on advisory skill sets, right? They don't necessarily know what they mean, so we have to go in there and we have to advise them, and we have to really do those requirements and the scoping calls. But it's also about relationship building, and I think that's the critical part. So the other element is the engagement activities that we have to do. So really, my definition would be a hybrid approach utilizing assurance, advisory, and engagement activities to ensure both internal and external compliance. And we could go on a rabbit hole of all the different things that entails. But to me, that's what actually has led me to really love my job, because there's a ton of opportunity under that definition.
So then, running the clock back a little bit, how is it that you ended up with an e-discovery background in the role that you have today?
Meaning career-wise, or how did I end up at AZ, or?
Oh, yeah. I mean, how is it? There's a path there that you took, and at least looking backwards, it will make sense. If it's like my path, it only makes sense looking backwards. It never made sense looking forward.
Oh, and I love that you said that, because I mean, a little bit about me is I went to school for graphic design. I wanted to go into advertising, right? So technology and designing and software and creativity, like my brothers all were the lucky ones from the business acumen. Mm-hmm. I was the art creative. And so actually, because of my brother, he's the one that introduced me to e-discovery world, and I had no idea what it was. And it was at the time that paper scanning was kind of crossing over into the digital world. And he always had his eye on technology. And because I always loved the software part of it, not necessarily the infrastructure part of it, I just became a learn-it-all. And I love that word. I just heard it like 2 weeks ago, and it is. I'm a learn-it-all when it comes to software and basically helping our end users. And if an end user has a challenge, I
think that's a great phrase. I don't think I've ever heard that before.
Really?
Either, a learn-it-all.
Yeah.
As soon as you said that, I thought, well, that is what our industry is. We all have to be learn-it-alls, because even today, we're still really at the early days of all of this. And we've got to absorb so much, figure out so much, where there's not necessarily a set roadmap to follow.
Yeah. You just hit the nail on the head.
So there you were, a learn-it-all.
And, you know, concordance, summation, how everything works, how everything goes into it. And then I got the opportunity to do external consulting, right? And I think where we all saw my strength was with the end user experience. And like I said, I think having those different career paths, like law firm, right? And then going into the vendor side of things and leaving the vendor side for a while and going to defense and then going to plaintiffs. and then learning how the various sides interact with each other. Like that was probably the most eye-opening experience. And I can't name names, but I probably can name your product, but I can't name names.
Yeah.
The mentors that I was surrounded with, right? I think a lot of it is I just was so grateful to be around people who were forward thinking in a time that wasn't necessarily ready for it. And
by the way,
I left,
I'm okay if you name names.
well, this is kind of the critical part because,
Yeah.
I had left the vendor side pretty much for good in 2016. And someone who I looked up to and admired gave me an opportunity to go to a plaintiff's firm with her. And they had Next LP. And that product changed everything for me. Because when you started looking at data and creating relationships and creating connections, it really expanded your mind in terms of how you could offer solutions to your end users. And that was, I think, where it hit me that all of my past experience is probably coming together right now to kind of further help that. And then long story short, I was fortunate to get into AZ, and that was a whole new experience for me of creating relationships beyond legal. And I think that was the key of like bringing these connections to a world outside of legal. And within the last year, there was just an opening on a new team, and the Global Assurance Services team is a brand new team. And someone had reached out to me because I did a project with them, and they said, "Hey, we've got this role. For some reason, I feel like you would be good for it. Would you read the job description and see if you're interested?" Long story short, I saw everything that I loved about my job: building relationships, learning new things, creating solutions for people outside of the legal industry, the US legal industry. And as fate would have it, I lucked out and interviewed and landed the job, and the rest is history. And now I have my new definition.
There you go. Out of curiosity, because so this is a new function or a new organization within the company. You've got your role. What other roles are in this new group?
It's interesting because I don't really know of many other organizations, and I have to give credit to the e-discovery industry, where I've created a lot of relationships outside of the internal workplace. So through LinkedIn and through, other networking groups, I just hear everybody underneath, legal operations. And I think, and I knew this when I joined AstraZeneca, that it was going to be something different. It's the first time I ever heard of e-discovery not reporting into legal operations. They reported into finance. So I think the thing that I've taken advantage of from my own perspective is trying to get ideas and influence to say, "Hey, what about this?" to people who have no idea what e-discovery is. And when you make those connections to a world in different places, again, you still need the tools, you still need the technology, but you just have new ways to apply what you've learned. And I think a 20+ year career has allowed me to be even more creative now. And so I think the fact that the turning point was that e-discovery didn't report into legal operations. They reported into a non-legal business tower.
So I've certainly encountered situations where e-discovery has reported to or been under the organizational chart under IT or some equivalent name. Finance, I think, is a new one to me.
Me too.
Any idea why that?
I forget the story. My former manager, he was a big part of that. I think he had the vision. He's an attorney, and he saw like the opportunities. I think still within that legal bucket. So me, who has no ties whatsoever to legal, was like, "Ooh, again, learn it all. How can I use this in a world that nobody's really talking about?" But the other part of it, and it's really coming into, and I can't talk specifics about how we're executing on it, but really the business tower that we're a part of under finance is called Global Business Services. So GBS, and we're compliance, legal, and contracting operations. So we're trying this vision that I believe in wholeheartedly, and so does my current manager, is a vision of global shared services, right? How can we bring all this together and offer different ways to our entire global organization?
So finance with what a much broader remit or mandate than at least I usually think of
Yep,
in association with finance.
exactly. And our financial org is, I mean, our org chart is pretty huge. So as you can imagine.
So how then does the background, give me more detail about how your background in e-discovery so well suits you for this new role?
So I know I have kind of a long title of assurance services engagement manager. And this actually happened when I told you my definition of what I think assurance service is. I had put engagement in there before I even thought of my, connected it to my title, but it's the relationship building. I would probably say that, of course, I owe a lot to, my former manager who brought me in under the e-discovery umbrella, because we were supporting compliance and non-legal stakeholders as well as legal stakeholders for litigation. And I was in there for 2.5 years, but my role went more to supporting compliance because that was more of a new area. So I ran with it and built all these relationships. And that's, I think, critical to doing this, because you have to build the trust. You have to, they have to know that you have their best interest at heart. And so I was able to build relationships with people throughout the organization because of my e-discovery work. And then when the GBS vision of, shared services with innovation and scale came to be, I was like, oh, and then this role came up. So everything really, I mean, I have to be honest, it's an uncharted path. We're all in this together. It's new. If anybody knows of anybody else out there that's doing it, I think we're just figuring it out as we go for right now, but it feels like we're on the cutting edge of something new and different.
So part of what I'm hearing is the skills and techniques you needed to develop to convince people to open up their email accounts and their mobile devices for collection and for digging into their data. Those same skills are valuable for where you are now.
I love it. I know I'm not really answering your question, but I like when you put it that way. Absolutely, right? My skills to go into somebody, it's like, hey, I've got a challenge. I can't make this document production work, right? Those same skills are going to allow me to say, hey, I have a regulatory report that I need to get in 7 days, and I can't get this data out of the system. How can you help me? And so we're trying to create those solutions so that our stakeholders can meet their regulatory obligations, because everybody knows data, data doesn't change. And I think that's the common theme. Anybody who uses data or needs data, especially for a compliance perspective, if they have challenges, they have the same challenges as someone who's trying to produce this data for a litigation, at least in my mind.
Yeah, they need to undertake the same basic things. They have to figure out what data they've got. They've got to find the data that matters to them, make coherent sense of it, figure out where the holes are, all those same tasks.
And what format is it going to be in?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But the beautiful part of all this is we also, and again, I know we're fortunate, so I can't take it for granted, is we have resources for automation, right?
Yep.
And so we're also things that a lot of people have to do manually. We have development teams. We've got resources. We've got, again, there's external partnerships. And it kind of goes back to, I think there's a lot of opportunity for everybody. If I may speak candidly, I'm not here to offend. It's just me being genuine, is that there's a whole other world beyond legal. And sometimes I think we just get boxed into legal e-discovery. And the $1 million question that I'm always asking is, there's certain situations where it's not cost effective to have a non-litigation or a non-legal matter driven by a U.S. legal process. And that, I think, is the question that you're going to start hearing from global organizations more often.
So let's see if let's try to take this in a couple of ways and see if we get to at least both of them and maybe more.
Okay.
The unboxing here, if you will. It can apply to a person. It can apply to an organization. Let's start with the people who would like to unbox themselves, if you will. Take those skills, those techniques, the experience they have from being in the world of e-discovery and do what I think of as moving up and out into other arenas. What advice do you have for folks who might want to do that?
I love this because my gut instinct is answering while I'm listening to you with the question. So I'm going to go with my gut instinct on this and this question and answer. You need a champion, and it has to start from the top down. Because if you don't have those that believe in it and aren't willing to nurture and build those relationships, then you're going to probably have more of a challenge. I am in a very fortunate position where my current line manager is just thinking way beyond. Again, we've got a GBS vision of shared services. That's our senior vice president, and she is doing it from the top down. So champion and having a supporting environment is really critical.
What if it's someone who hopes to move to a new organization? So then there's not an established relationship with a clear champion at that point.
And I think that's where the learn it all comes in, because and I'm starting to realize this about myself, is that I tend to move on when I stop learning. You know what I mean? And I saw that as job hopping, but it was like, no, I need to be challenged a little bit more. And I'm probably one of the rare people, like I truly love what I do. And if someone asks me for something and I don't know the answer, I'll tell them I don't know the answer, but I'm going to go learn that. And again, not everybody loves that mentality. So is it going to come easy? Absolutely not. But if you put the work in and you build those relationships, and mentorship is extremely important, because what is it that we hear in a lot of different sessions? It's not about what people say to you. It's about what they say about you when you're not in the room. And if you build that reputation and that work ethic, and you're trying to make their life a little bit better, they're going to remember you. And again, this didn't happen overnight. It took 2.5 years of kind of having that mentality and building those relationships for someone to be like, hey, would you consider this? And, someone's looking out for me.
So how have you, and we'll see if we get back to the organization side, but how do you balance these two things that are in tension? One, the need to be patient. And two, what I heard is you don't do bored well.
Guilty.
How do you balance those two things?
Guilty. And actually, I was joking with my current manager. I'm like, my goal for 2024 is more patience. Not to take it off the topic, but I've also done personal development outside of work. And so a business coach, masterminds programs, because I've been developing the skills to not be as reactive and emotional as I have been in the past. And I'm perfectly honest or perfectly open to sharing that. Working with a business coach and doing those personal development things, because you need self-awareness to know when you're pushing too much. And you do have to practice patience, because you are in a role that you're hired for, and you can't keep pushing beyond the boundaries, because you do actually have a job to do. So you have to find that balance. It's hard.
Yeah, it's a kind of off point, but on point. A former colleague of mine with essentially a solo consulting practice had just that type of coach. He also each year did his own firm retreat. His firm was just him. But he took off, he blocked off however long it was, a day or 2 or 3, I don't remember. And that was his time to think about what he was doing, how he was doing it, where he wanted to go, what he wanted to be, what he'd learned with the coach over the previous year. It sounds like you've got maybe not that formal structure, but you've got that process baked into what you do as well.
Yeah, it's funny that you just mentioned that, because I just read an article, again, learning all, saying that it was a business CEO, and he said that there's 3 or 4 questions, I don't know them offhand, that he goes on a long walk, maybe like 5 to 7 miles, and he asks himself those questions on that walk, because you have to kind of reflect on what it is that you want and where you want to go. And I'm not going to say that my career has been easy. I probably had 2 defining moments in my career that I obviously won't get into. that made me actually ask myself, is this what I want to do? And sometimes the hardest things that happen in your career are the best because you realize what it is that you don't want. And so as I started reflecting on that, I landed in AZ and it opened me up to a whole new world. And that's the interesting thing, is that corporate is so different from law firm, which is so different from vendor. You have to really decide what it is that you want to do and what it is that you want. And being in the corporate world and having these opportunities, this is where I want to be and hopefully where I get to stay. But it took me a lot of hard work for me to figure that out, because I do love the e-discovery consulting and I was pretty good at it. But to be able to use those skills, I'm pretty lucky to do that today as well.
Back to the corporation then. For a corporation that wants to leverage the e-discovery skills, expertise, people available to it, and use them, all of those, in a productive way in an arena that's outside of traditional e-discovery, what words of wisdom do you have for folks in those organizations?
Start small. I think that's the lesson I had to learn, because in my head, I go big and I go big fast. Small. And another mentor in the industry, and actually not in e-discovery, he's more in the AI industry. He's like, Maureen, don't worry about it. Just start with small bite-sized chunks. And I walked away from that going, small bite-sized chunks. Okay, I don't need to go from 0 to 100. And I think that's the best advice, right? Find your champion, find a use case. And, in the industry, in the e-discovery industry, we talk about information governance. We talk about compliance investigations. Let me tell you, there's probably about 30 more areas. And if you can find those areas and you get creative and you start small, use a small test case to prove your value, because once you see the value or prove the value, it starts to spread by word of mouth. Like, oh, I heard so-and-so did this. We've got this challenge. Is it something that you could help with? And so, yeah, start small.
So you are then a fan of incrementalism, which, to oversimplify, is making a big change eventually through a lot of small changes along the way.
I am now. I have to admit, I'm a recovering, go big, go fast to, yes, I do that now.
So take an incremental approach, bit by bit. And I think it was a poem by Shel Silverstein, who's a children's poet, but maybe it was by another children's poet.
I remember that book.
The essence of the poem was, little bit by little bit, he ate all of it.
Yes. Yeah. And, I think 2024 is going to be a big year for us too. So I'm really excited to see where it goes.
Why? I mean, why is 2024 going to be a big year for us?
I think I say that because, like I said, we just had our end of year meetings and we were talking about all the different opportunities. I think there's a lot of interest in what our team is doing right now. And I don't know how it's going to turn out, right? Because like you said, we're doing something new. And again, so I had to take a step back too, because I took it for granted that everybody knows about legal e-discovery, the US legal e-discovery process, and no one that I'm working with, because again, we're global. So you've got people in the UK, they don't do discovery the way that the US does discovery. So I'm actually feel like I'm going back in the past to say, okay, now I have to really think about what I say and how I teach people. So it's an education process. And I think 2024 is going to be interesting because we're educating a lot of people on how we can do things and how we can do things better. We might be looking at some new technologies and things like that too. So we have a lot of opportunities ahead of us.
Well, I like the one thing that I've noted in our discussion today is the excitement and the enthusiasm in your voice. And, that's not always the case in discussions that have to do with e-discovery careers and opportunities. So I really like that. Any closing words of advice, either for those people or for those organizations?
Oh my gosh, that's a tough one because there's so many things that you could do. I think stay open-minded, and stay curious. Question everything. I mean, I question everything sometimes to the point where people are like, okay, Maureen, whatever. So again, I'm learning balance with that. But I think if it's find those champions, find someone who wants to do something a different way. You don't have to have all the answers. But if you take the time to really understand your stakeholders and their needs, if you've got the tools and the resources, and even if you don't, try to think outside the box and then try to connect, again, mentorship and connect with vendors such as yourself who can bring those ideas to light. It might take a year or two, but start the discussions and get people thinking. And I think that's where a lot of it comes from.
Well, Maureen, thank you so much. Maureen Holland is it's a mouthful, but the Global Assurance Services Engagement Manager at AstraZeneca. I'm George Socha. This has been eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. Maureen, thank you so much for joining us this week.
Thank you, George. Love the conversation.
Likewise.